There you go.
What else do you want to know that I haven't covered yet? I know it was really broad.
So how long have you been doing it?
About 20 years, give or take.
Wow. And what, I guess, made you decide that's what I want to do? That's what I want to focus on for, the next 20 years.
It's interesting actually because I was born that way, so to speak. I'm one of those people. I know it's fairly rare, but it does exist. I'm one of those people who remember their past lives, and so in many ways, I just picked it up where I left it off, pretty much. And most of my past lives were either monk related, so spiritual, or on the warrior side. And well, in this lifetime, obviously, the warrior side, although it was obviously very helpful from the mental perspective, because certain things and habits that they teach you really do help in your everyday life. But on the spiritual side, I had a lot of insights to share. And so I just continued with that. It was something that was close to home. And for some time, I was just gathering this information. I was happy to research and use it, but over time, I realized that other people would really benefit from what I've discovered, especially because there seems to be a lot of cloudy water, I would say, in terms of spirituality and teaching spirituality. And as I said, the way spirituality is being taught right now in the West is mostly geared towards women. Even if they don't say it explicitly, like, we only teach women, what happens is when a guy comes to them, if you actually observe what happens, it's quite interesting because you can notice that, say, a few months into the training, their look, their energy, their choices, their thinking will become much softer and much more feminine. And although it's a good thing for some people, for the majority is not, because here is where depression comes from. Essentially, depression is it's like an error message from your mind. Like if you're using a laptop and you have error messages popping up, and then you can look up what they mean. But with your mind, we don't usually have this book of error codes. And so essentially, this is what I give to people. I just explain to them what each code means and what they can do to fix it. And with depression specifically, this error code goes that you are disconnected from the source of your true power. So you are less than the person you're supposed to be. And it can get really tricky because the way your mind communicates from that level, that's your subconscious mind. And it speaks in feelings. So it doesn't put it concisely into words for the conscious mind to understand, usually. And so the person just feels bad, depressed, suffocating, but he doesn't know why, because there are no words. It's just that feeling that something is wrong. And this is what drives people just crazy, because it's like you're fighting an invisible enemy, and you're there because it's there because you're getting hit, but you can't see where those blows are coming from. So yeah, it's really maddening. And I've been suffering from depression myself for a very long time, and a lot of my research was dedicated to that. So I never took any medicine. I never went to any therapy. I just didn't feel. I listened to my intuition a lot. And so I was researching how you can use the power of your own mind to do different things that you want to do and to change yourself. So, for example, one of the reasons why I look like this, people think I'm in my 20s. I'm not, I'm in my 40s. So that is one of the, I would say, side effects or effects of my work. And so that disconnect, going back to what we just spoke about, that disconnect from who you're supposed to be as according to your subconscious or your soul, whichever way you want to name it, that disconnect actually is worth if you are not in alignment with your polarity. And as you probably know, there are two polarities in the universe, the feminine and the masculine, or the electric and the magnetic, accordingly. Then it goes down in levels until it reaches the physical level where it manifests in male or female bodies. But the polarity is always there. And so not being true to your polarity, and for the majority of people, is the polarity of their body. So if someone was born as a man or a woman, that's their polarity to explore in this lifetime, in most cases. And so for most guys, as they go into spirituality, and usually the reason why they go into spirituality is not because they're in a good place. Like usually if you're in a good place, if you're really enjoying yourself, if everything is fine, you're just content and you're just enjoying your life. You don't want anything extra, like you don't want to spend any more effort. And this is something our brain does to us, because our brain makes us unwilling to spend energy unless it's necessary. So it works there as well. So most people go into spirituality because something is missing, because they're in pain, because they're looking for answers. And so if they do it the way that is being taught right now, it actually pulls them further away from where they should be and further away from their actual core and their true inner power. And so they get really depressed. And this is how you can see so many people in spirituality, and not just the students, but spiritual teachers and gurus. And you would think that really they all have figured it out, but many of them are depressed. And quite often I hear people committing suicide as well, taking their own life, which obviously comes as a surprise, because if you are so spiritual, right, you're supposed to have it all figured out and be in a good place yourself. But for guys, it's typically not, because their minds function in a different way. So yeah, this is why I'm here, because I was looking at it for a long time and I just thought it wasn't right. And so I wanted to put it right because I can.
Gotcha. Wow. Wow, 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 wow. That's
Well, thank you.
incredible. Man, that's a lot. I don't even know what other question to ask. That's it's very interesting, because you're right. Here in Western societies, we look at spirituality as like that's nice. That's a fun to have, or like only the wackos are into that type of thing,
Yep. Hippies,
or
yeah.
you know you're like a religion, you're like a diet religion. It's a very like skewed look at spirituality, but
Yeah.
you're also right in the fact that the only people that understand it are the people that are typically broken, because they've
Yeah.
searched everywhere, they've searched high and low, and then they finally, I mean, more than likely it's their intuition finally tapping in, because everything else is broken down around them. They have nothing but to just listen to that little voice in their head, and that leads them to kind of explore it. And then when they
Yeah.
explore it, depending on who they hear it from, where they learn it, it could be a very dark spiritual journey, one that's more like enlightening. And then on top of that, the dark and the light is very feminine in that type of energy. It's very, light, uplifting, peace, happiness. There's what you can do.
Exactly.
There's not much of that. And
Exactly. I call it unicorn dust.
yeah, it's very fluffy. And that's why a
Yep.
lot of people look at it like, okay, that's nice. Have fun in your fairyland.
Yeah.
Like, oh yeah,
Yeah.
there's magical wavelengths and stuff. Awesome. you know,
Yeah.
they never talk about the science behind it, because there's so few. I think there's only like two or three research centers or institutions that have really dialed in and focused on the quantum mechanics side of that equation, the metaphysical elements. that's really cool, and I'm glad they exist, but I wish more effort went into that, because that is the more masculine, healthy energy that balances out all the fairy dust. So I'm glad to hear you're
Totally,
interested in
totally.
that.
Totally. I mean, after John Kabat-Zinn started his research and work, and after that Harvard study, they kind of started popping up. So it started being a more spoken about topic. So it got a more, especially mindfulness, it became more of a buzzword, and mindfulness for work. And they're Huffington meditation sessions for their employees, from what I remember. So yeah, it's gradually picking up, but you're so right. The way it's being presented is just very fluffy and not empowering. And especially, I would say the main fault, like the main problem, is that they use mistranslated Oriental sources, which they don't understand, and which people who translated didn't understand properly either. And many of those concepts, when they were first explored, say in the 19th century, especially, the New Thought and all of that, what started happening is that those first researchers who came in contact with Oriental Eastern thought, they started translating that, but at the same time making it westernized, but not in the right way. This is, for example, what happened to the concept of karma, where they took the concept that existed in the East and brought it to the West, and they couldn't understand it properly. So in their mind, they thought, okay, because they were Christians, and like very deeply so at the time. And so they mixed it up with the concept of sin. And now they created a concoction where karma is something that's chasing you from the past lives for the bad things that you've done, except there are no past lives.
We're only going to keep half the equation.
Yeah. And so, God somehow persecutes you and punishes you for your bad deeds, and except you don't remember them, and you're only supposed to live once. So that's a contradiction in terms. But to them, that was the only way they understood it. And now it actually propagates it this way. So most people don't fully understand how karma works. And they even think that it's a different thing from the law of attraction, for example. And it's the same thing. Mm-hmm. It's the law of interaction between you and the universe. So what you put out and what the universe is reflecting back to you. And it's funny how, as I said, those two concepts actually got separated. And I think that's hugely disempowering in itself, because if someone gets exposed to that concept in the wrong way, they start feeling less than they are. Because, well, imagine, what can you do technically against some mysterious unseen force that is keeping the score and keeps persecuting you for you don't know what? So that makes the person feel like a victim, and that intensifies depression, because everything that pulls you away from your true core intensifies depression, unfortunately. And this is why, for example, people get depressed if they lose a job, or some people do, because if their mindset is, oh, actually, that's an opportunity for me, because I always wanted to start my business and I never had the guts to tell my boss that I want to quit. So that's sweet. So there are some people like that, and then they don't get depressed, they actually get excited about this opportunity. But if they don't have this mindset and they lose their job and they feel hugely disempowered, hugely out of control, like something happens to them and they have no say, so they get depressed. And people start treating it like as separate things and separate causes for, people get depressed because of that. But really, it's the underlying root issue. It's just the feeling of being out of control. And the reason why it's such a huge problem is because it goes against our nature. You know how in many religions they say that we were created in God's image. And if someone is created in God's image and God is a creator, then obviously, children take after their parents. Well, they have to, right? So because of that, we've inherited that part of that divine power that created us. And our true core, our essence, knows that. But the ego, the little me, the little story of whatever I'm doing in this lifetime, is obviously not aware of that. So it acts based on whatever limited worldview is got. And then the true self goes, right, I really disagree with what the ego is doing. But because it doesn't speak in words, it just gives a signal that something is wrong. And depends on how much it disagrees with what the ego is doing, that signal can get really strong. And unfortunately for some people, there is that mechanism in us that if we keep persevering on the wrong path and the soul feels that that's it, like the ego is not going to change anything, I'm not able to influence this situation, it just goes, well, I'm not interested in doing this anymore. I quit. And this is where they sadly end their lives. And I think it's a huge tragedy because it can be avoided if they just change their course, because this is all their soul wants. It doesn't want anything like way out there. It simply wants that person to correct that course and go back to what they're supposed to be, like their highest expression of selves.
I 100% agree. Based on my journey, my experience, and based on a lot of other people that have tried to help in the past, how do you, because the biggest thing that I see that stops people is the ego, right? We know that.
Yeah.
But how do you break past the deconstructing that needs to happen? That's the hardest part for people, like the 5 levels of attachment. The people that are on that 5th level, how do you break past that? That is the hardest thing that I still cannot have an answer to, because it's like leading a horse to water and like trying to make it drink. You can lead it, you can lay out the trail, you can do everything, but at the end of the day, they're like, no, because if I turn my back on this, that means my entire life's been a lie, and I don't like that. That's scary. And it's like, well,
there you go. He's like
that. How do you break past
that? There is actually a beautifully simple way of doing that. And this is why people also need a mentor, because it's very true that it's super hard to do it yourself. So even if you have the answer, well, if you don't have anyone to hold your hand from time to time and motivate you and keep you accountable, it's actually very easy to get beaten by your ego. And the ego says, yeah, I don't like this. I don't like that. I feel uncomfortable. So there is a beautifully simple way. And the way is having a structure in place. First, you understand how your mind works. You need to know that there are 4 levels of the mind. And so for most people, unfortunately, the reason why they are in a bad state is because they don't have the whole pyramid functioning properly. So what happens is the highest level of the mind, which is their spiritual mind, or you can call it the higher self. That higher self is our actual self. It's not the higher self, it's the true self. It's us. And because the ego is not set up in the right way, the link is not functioning properly. And so imagine it like a motherboard in a computer. And so if there are some connections that are either burned out or not connected properly. So there is no current going through them. That part of the motherboard is still existing. It's like it's there and it's fully functional, but it doesn't have the power to connect with the rest because of that connection is broken. So what happens is, instead of us living as our true selves through that higher self, and your higher self, you can imagine, well, it depends because it has different levels of manifesting and it doesn't really belong in this world. So you can envision it as like a superhero or an archangel version of you, something like that. This kind of a being. Now, because that level is disconnected, what happens is the mind was supposed to, by nature, was supposed to function in the way where all those levels are in place and they all communicate and interact. And for most people, they have no access to their higher self, or only in some situations that are, say, force majeure, when there is an accident, when there is a tragedy, big trauma, something is happening. And this is when some people, I don't know if you read the stories. I came across a story, for example, where there was a car accident and there was a mother with 2 children, and those children got trapped in the car, and the force of the impact turned the car around, and so they couldn't get out. They got trapped in that car. And she actually lifted it and pushed by herself to let her children out. And she wasn't an athlete or anyone with superpowers. She was just a regular woman. But in that moment, she was so distressed that her ego basically blanked out. And this is when even if we're not trained, if the ego shuts down, we naturally get connected to the true self and the powers that is God. So she was able to use that just for a moment, but that wasn't enough. And there are stories, like loads of stories like that, because in that moment, their ego didn't remember their story of, being wheelchair bound. And they only thought, right, I need to do this, I need to act. And then their higher self stepped in and allowed this to happen. And there are loads and loads of such stories. So this is how we were supposed to function in an ideal scenario. And because we don't, with most people, that interface, which is the ego, takes on the role of the actual self, and it was not designed to do that. And this is why it keeps failing at this task, because the task is beyond it. The ego is like, it's only small, it's limited and fragile. And most people put it in a position where it has to fill in the shoes that are way too big, because it has to act on behalf of an immortal and a very powerful being, which it's not. So the deputy keeps failing nonstop. So, answering your question, what we need to do, we actually need to reconnect the system so it works as it's designed to. And then you unburden the ego from the task that is beyond its capabilities. And you start living more as your true self. And everything from there gets streamlined, because you just reconnect the wires and the energy flows. So the saying that it's impossible to fix the problems from the level where those problems arise, or by the means of the system that has created that problem in the first place. And so when people try to subdue the ego using the methods based on the ego, this is why they struggle so much with it. And being aware of how it works makes the solution, as I said, beautifully simple. All you need to do, you need to reconnect that, and you need to reach to the level of your higher self. In other words, awaken that awareness of your higher self, of your true self, actually, as a spiritual being living in this physical body, and the ego being your interface. So it literally allows you not to be frightening, because if you are that powerful, charismatic, but at the same time, like something that is beyond most people's understanding, if you just go around like that, you frighten people. And so instead of doing that, which I believe is unkind, instead of doing that, you put on like a cloak, and that's your ego. So you interact with them through that interface. But that interface is exactly how it's supposed to function. So it's not trying to take the place of your true self, and it's not causing any problems, and it's not causing any unhealthy attachments or anything that is typically associated with the ego when it runs the show. And like it's perfectly doable, and it's much easier in a way than going through those endless courses and endless trainings which only target the ego. Or even if they tell you about being a more spiritual beings, they have no idea how to do it. They literally don't. And so actually they serve to make the ego stronger, because they make the people believe that if they have taken those courses and they paid so much, they've earned their enlightenment. Like, their enlightenment has been paid for, so therefore it belongs to them. And it doesn't quite work like that, and it makes their further work difficult, because if they don't realize that, they're like, oh, but I've taken so many courses, surely I'm all right. And it's not what it's about.